In my first life, my best friend stole my husband and murdered my daughter. In my second, I smiled to her face, sheltered her from danger, and handed her straight into hell. By the time she realized I was the one pulling the strings, it was too late and my husband was next. The wind howled in my ears, whipping my hair into my face as the world tilted, twisted, and blurred beneath me. My hand was locked in a death grip on Vanessa Ward's wrist, her manicured nails biting into my skin like talons. We tumbled together, two tangled silhouettes against the cold steel and glass skyline. Her voice was high and shrill, slicing through the rush of air. Aurora. Let go. Let go. Let go. After everything? The rooftop's edge was already far above us, the city rushing up fast enough to turn my stomach inside out. I didn't even know if I was screaming or if the sound was just the wind tearing my breath apart. All I knew was that the woman in my grasp was not just my ex-best friend. She was the architect of my ruin, the thief who had stolen my family, my future, my child's life. Her eyes were wild with terror, the whites flashing in quick glances at me and then at the ground below. I saw my own reflection in them, but it wasn't fear staring back. It was something sharper, colder. Just before the world was supposed to go black, I heard my own voice inside my skull, clear, steady, unshaken. If there is another life, Vanessa Ward, I will never let you climb again. I will never let you touch the life I built, never let you cross into a world you don't deserve. Not over my blood, not over my daughter's grave. It was the last promise I made in that life. And then, Rory. Rory, did you hear? The sound was close, loud, and far too alive for a dead woman. My eyes snapped open to a ceiling I knew by heart. Off-white, cracked along one corner, with a faint stain that looked suspiciously like a coffee spill from the girls upstairs. I blinked hard, but the sight didn't change. The air smelled faintly of detergent and instant noodles. For a moment I wondered if I was in some strange limbo, a holding cell for restless ghosts. But then something shook me hard and I realized it was hands, warm, living hands, gripping my shoulders. Vanessa. Not the Vanessa who had lounged in penthouses and called my daughter an inconvenience. Not the Vanessa with the lip scar, the perfect blowouts, the high society arrogance she wore like perfume. This Vanessa was younger, rounder cheeks, a few stray baby hairs escaping her ponytail, her beauty still the kind that felt accidental rather than curated. She was practically bouncing in front of me, her brown eyes bright with excitement. The organizers of the jewelry design competition just announced the prizes. If I make it into the top 3, I get a direct offer from Belmont Jewelers. Can you believe it? Belmont. I just stared at her, my pulse roaring in my ears. My mind was spinning in 2 timelines at once. The moment I had died and the moment before me now. She frowned slightly. Aurora? Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I almost laughed at that. Thing one. I was one. Or I had been, a moment ago. I glanced around, forcing my eyes to take in every detail like evidence in a case I had to prove to myself. The cramped dorm room, 2 narrow beds with mismatched quilts, the corkboard on the far wall plastered with exam schedules and a couple of magazine cutouts, the wardrobe with the squeaky hinge we always meant to oil. This was my university dorm. The one I'd shared with her. This wasn't limbo. This was years ago. I had been reborn. The realization shot through me like an electric current, my chest tightening with a rush of dizzying joy. My lungs burned like I'd been holding my breath since the fall, and now I could finally inhale. But right behind the joy came the rage. Hot. All-consuming. The last time I'd seen her face this young, I'd thought she was my friend. My sister in all but blood. I'd trusted her with the most precious thing in my life, my daughter. And she had repaid me with betrayal so deep it still felt like a blade lodged in my ribs. My fingers twitched with the urge to wrap around her throat. To end it now before she could ever hurt me again. But no. Not yet. Killing her here would be a waste of the gift I'd been given. Death was quick. I wanted slow. I wanted her to know exactly what she'd lost, to watch every rung of the ladder she'd once climbed splinter under her feet. So I curled my lips into the smile she used to trust. Really? Then let me congratulate you in advance. With your ability, top 3 shouldn't be a problem at all. If she heard the acid under the sugar, she didn't react. She grinned, wide open, completely unaware. You've always believed in me, she said warmly, squeezing my hands. I'm so lucky to have you. Aurora, I mean it. Meeting you is the luckiest thing that's ever happened to me. I want you at the finals. I want you to be there when I win so you can witness the first glorious moment of my life. With me." Her eyes glistened and she looked so damn sincere that for a heartbeat I almost forgot. Almost. I nodded slowly. Of course. I'll be there. I didn't add that I'd dress for the occasion. Not in celebration, but in anticipation of the day her glory burned to ash. She beamed, satisfied, and started rattling off details about the competition schedule, the designs she was working on, the amazing gown she was thinking of wearing for her presentation. I let her voice wash over me, my thoughts elsewhere. I was back at the starting line, armed with knowledge of the finish. And this time I was going to rewrite the ending. When she finally flopped onto her bed, pulling out her phone to scroll through her messages, I lay back on mine and stared at the ceiling. My mind was a map, tracing every turn that had led to my last life's disaster. In the days ahead I would have to play this carefully. No sudden moves. No obvious hostility. Vanessa was many things. Selfish, vain, manipulative, but she wasn't stupid. If she suspected I was onto her before I'd set the board, she'd simply find another way to claw her way up. Well, she would think I was still her friend. Her closest ally. Until she found out I was her executioner. I rolled onto my side, watching her from the corner of my eye. She was texting someone, smiling to herself, her thumbs flying across the screen. Probably her brother Caleb. In my last life I hadn't paid much attention to him until it was too late. This time I would notice everything. And it all started with the finals. When I closed my eyes that night I could still feel the rush of the fall, the weight of her wrist in my hand. But now there was no fear in it, only the steady thrum of a plan beginning to take shape. Tomorrow the clock would start ticking. And this time I'd be the one counting it down. When I closed my eyes that night intending to plan my next move, the past crept in anyway. Not the sanitized version I'd repeated to strangers, but the raw, unvarnished truth. I first met Vanessa Ward in my sophomore year. Back then she was just another pretty face on campus. The kind of girl people whispered about in the cafeteria, wondering how someone so beautiful could look so fragile. Her beauty had that almost childlike quality. Wide eyes, soft cheeks, lips that curled naturally into a pout. But the first time I actually spoke to her was on a day that stripped away the illusion entirely. I just finished my last lecture and was cutting across the plaza when I heard shouting. Not the rowdy, laughing kind that floated out of the student center, but the harsh, ugly kind that turned heads for all the wrong reasons. Ungrateful brat. We worked our fingers to the bone for you and this is how you repay us. The voice belonged to a middle-aged man, reeking of alcohol even from a few feet away. His face was red, not from embarrassment but from sheer rage. Beside him, a thin, pinched woman stood with her arms crossed, muttering something sharp enough to make the girl in front of them flinch. That girl was Vanessa. Her eyes darted around, clearly hoping someone would intervene, but most people just skirted the scene, heads down. No one wanted to step between a family mid-explosion. I don't know what made me stop. Maybe it was the fact that her hands were clenched so tightly around the strap of her bag that her knuckles were bone white. Maybe it was the way her eyes looked. Trapped, cornered, desperate. "Is there a problem here?" I asked, stepping closer. The man turned on me immediately. "Who the hell are you?" I ignored him and looked at Vanessa. "Do you want me to call security?" Something in her posture changed. Not relief, not yet, but a kind of grim hope. "Please," she said softly. I took out my phone and made the call without breaking eye contact with her father. That was the first time I saw the exact moment she decided to trust me. Security escorted them off campus, and I found out later they'd come all the way from their hometown just to demand money from her. Her brother, Caleb, had racked up another round of gambling debts, and they thought Vanessa's fancy college friends should be able to bail them out. We ended up in the campus cafe afterward, 2 steaming mugs between us. She told me about her family in halting pieces, each one worse than the last. The alcoholic father, the mother who'd never met a bad decision she couldn't defend, the brother who gambled away anything of value that crossed his hands. She was 20 and already carrying more weight than most people twice her age. From that day we were inseparable. At least that's how it looked from the outside. In reality, it was me doing most of the giving and her taking in a way that was subtle enough to feel harmless. At first. When her scholarship funds fell short one semester, I covered her tuition. When she couldn't afford textbooks, I bought them as a gift. I never asked for repayment and she never offered. It didn't feel like charity. It felt like protecting someone who'd never been protected before. I didn't tell her about the extra shifts I took at the library or the freelance design jobs I squeezed in at night. I wanted her to focus on her studies, on getting out of the hole she'd been born into. It all came to a head in our final year, when Belmont Jewelers announced their national design competition. The top 3 winners would be offered positions within the company, along with a starting salary that could change someone's life. Vanessa's eyes had lit up when she heard. "If I win, I'll finally be free," she'd whispered to me one night in our dorm. "No more begging. No more debt collectors. I could live." I believed her. God help me, I believed her. I threw myself into helping her prepare. I critiqued every sketch, every material choice, every presentation slide. I paid for the premium 3D modeling software she needed. I even coached her on public speaking, making her rehearse until she could deliver her concept without a single stammer. The day of the competition finals, she was radiant. And when she was announced as the winner, first place, I thought my heart might burst with pride. I didn't notice the way she looked past me in that moment, as if already scanning the crowd for someone more important to thank. Belmont Jewelers welcomed her with open arms. A starting salary of nearly $100,000 a year plus commissions. Within 2 years she was one of their rising stars, earning more than double that. She moved into a downtown apartment, started dressing in tailored suits, and collected acquaintances like they were accessories. But she never entirely shook off her past. Her family still tried to leech off her, though she learned to hold them at arm's length, or so I thought. When she finally cut them off completely, I thought it was a victory. She told me it was my support that had made it possible. "You're my real family," she'd said, eyes shining. Not them. I didn't realize she meant it only as long as it was convenient. Years later, my grandmother fell seriously ill. She lived abroad and I spent months flying back and forth to be with her during treatments. Marcus, my husband, supported the decision. So did Vanessa, or so she said. At the time Lila was 6. Bright, curious, endlessly talkative. She adored Vanessa, who'd been Aunt Vanessa since the day she was born. When I had to leave on short notice for my grandmother's emergency surgery, I didn't think twice about asking Vanessa to watch her for a week. It was the last unguarded decision of my life. Halfway through my trip, Marcus took Lila on a surprise vacation to Thailand. I thought it was spontaneous, a father-daughter adventure. I didn't know Vanessa just happened to have a business trip booked in the same city. I found out what really happened from Lila herself. Or tried to. My little girl was never good at keeping secrets, and one evening she blurted out something about seeing Daddy and Aunt Vanessa kissing by the hotel pool. She looked confused when I froze. "Is that bad?" she asked. 2 days later she was gone. The official story was that she'd wandered off in a crowded market. The truth, which I clawed out later, was that Vanessa had arranged for someone to take her. A group that specialized in trafficking children across the border into northern Myanmar. By the time authorities moved, it was too late. When I confronted Vanessa, my grief made my voice shake, but my words were sharp. "You watched her grow up. Other than me, you were the person she trusted most in the world. How could you do this?" She didn't even flinch. If anything, she looked relieved. "She had a congenital heart defect anyway," she said matter-of-factly. "Living would have meant suffering. This way she's free. And you're free too. You don't have to be tied to Marcus anymore. I can finally be with him the way we were meant to be. Isn't that something to be happy about?" That was the moment something inside me snapped clean in two. I dragged her with me off the roof of the Belmont corporate building 3 weeks later. And now, sitting in our cramped university dorm once again, watching the younger version of her scroll through her phone and hum softly to herself, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This time she wouldn't just lose Lila. She'd lose everything. When I woke the next morning, the faint hum of traffic outside the dorm was the same as it had been the night before. Vanessa was still asleep, one arm flung over her head, her breathing slow and even. I lay there for a moment watching her. It was strange, knowing exactly what she was capable of and seeing her like this, looking almost harmless. Almost. But harmless things don't survive long in this world, and Vanessa had survived by learning how to strike without warning. I wasn't going to wait for her strike this time. Classes that day were a blur. My mind was already far ahead, skipping past lectures and assignments, straight to the moment I would see Marcus again. The last time I'd looked into his eyes, they had been dark with guilt and full of excuses. This time they would still be warm with love. I could use that. By early evening I was standing in front of the townhouse we'd shared in my first life. The same pale stone, the same wrought iron railings, the same narrow windows that let in too little light. My pulse picked up, not from nerves, but from the anticipation of stepping back into a place I'd once thought of as home. When the door opened, he was there. Marcus Reed. My husband. He was wearing loungewear, his hair slightly mussed, and he looked younger somehow. His eyes widened when he saw me. Aurora? You're home. His voice was warm, almost boyish in its relief. I stepped inside without answering, my gaze drifting to the kitchen. On the counter, a bottle of baby formula lay open, milk powder scattered like snow. He was clearly trying to prepare a bottle, but the mess told me it wasn't going well. Let me do it, I said, taking it from his hands. He smiled sheepishly. I was trying. I'll get better at it. I washed, sterilized, and mixed the formula in practiced motions. He followed me like a shadow, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body at my back. Honey, he said softly, don't be mad. I'll improve. I promise. In my last life I would have melted at that. I would have kissed his cheek, told him he was doing fine. But that version of me was dead. I turned and met his gaze. I'm not mad. I'm just tired. His brow furrowed. Tired? Is something wrong at work? The opening was right there. I took it. There's trouble at Belmont Jewelers. I made a bad investment decision. If no new funds come in within a week, we might go bankrupt. Saying the words brought a lump to my throat, not because they were true but because I knew exactly how Marcus would react. He had always been desperate to prove himself to me, to protect me. And in this life, that instinct was still fresh, unspoiled by the years of resentment that would come later. Sure enough, he pulled me into his arms, his voice fierce. Don't worry. I'll figure something out. True to his word, less than a week later he came to me with a bank card. I sold everything I had in my name. This is what I could gather. I hope it helps. I took it with both hands, my face the picture of gratitude. You're the best, I said, forcing down the nausea curling in my stomach. I kissed him lightly on the lips, a gesture I knew would melt him completely. And then, sweet as sugar, I said, come to the jewelry competition finals with me. I want you there. It's important. The look on his face was almost childlike, delighted, surprised. Really? You want me there? I do. It wasn't a lie. I very much wanted him there. The day of the finals arrived crisp and bright, the sky a clear blue overhead. Marcus drove us to the venue, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching for mine. From the outside we must have looked like the perfect couple, polished, harmonious, in step. Inside I was already setting pieces on the board. The competition was being held in one of the city's largest convention centers. Banners bearing the Belmont logo hung from every balcony, and the air buzzed with chatter from contestants, journalists, and industry insiders. Vanessa was among the star competitors. Even in the crowd she stood out, her posture straight, her eyes bright with ambition. We made our way backstage. The lounge area was a narrow corridor lined with dressing rooms and a few open spaces where contestants were doing last-minute touch-ups on their designs. That was when someone barreled out of one of the side doors and slammed into me. The impact jolted me back a step. I looked up to see a man with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, his body language screaming urgency. He muttered something under his breath and tried to push past. Marcus, protective as ever, reached out and caught his arm. Watch where you're going. You bumped into her. Apologize. The man twisted in Marcus's grip, his voice defensive. Who the hell are you? Let go of me. I stepped forward, rubbing my arm where he'd hit me. Then I pretended to notice something, my eyes widening just enough. Wait. Aren't you Caleb Ward? I tilted my head, my tone mild. Vanessa's brother? The man froze, clearly unsure whether to confirm or deny. Yeah, he said finally, his voice gruff. She asked me to grab something for her. I smiled as if relieved. Then you'd better hurry. Take the path on the right so you don't delay her. Marcus glanced at me, puzzled, but I gently pried his fingers off Caleb's arm. It's fine, I murmured. He's just helping his sister. Caleb muttered a thanks and hurried off in the direction I'd indicated. Not long after, Vanessa appeared in the corridor. She was dressed immaculately, her hair and makeup flawless. Her gaze darted to the lounge door, then to us. "Did someone just come out of here?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but I stepped forward quickly, pushing him just slightly toward her. "Vanessa, I don't think you've met my husband. Marcus, this is Vanessa Ward, one of the top contestants today." Vanessa, Marcus Reed. Her attention shifted instantly. A faint blush colored her cheeks as she smiled shyly. "Hello, Marcus. I've heard so much about you." Marcus gave a polite nod, his expression neutral. If anything, his lack of enthusiasm seemed to intrigue her more. I watched her carefully, my own smile fixed. Every move today mattered. And this was the first thread I would pull. Vanessa's blush lingered as she turned back toward the lounge, clearly eager to get in and prepare. Marcus's brow creased slightly, his eyes flicking between us as if he sensed something unspoken in the air. But I was already stepping aside, letting Vanessa slip past. The hum of the competition outside was a living thing. Footsteps, murmured conversations, the faint clink of champagne glasses in the reception area. From the wings, I could see the main hall bathed in white light, the massive projection screen towering over the stage like a judge ready to pass sentence. The judging panel sat in the front row, a gleaming row of industry titans and Belmont executives. Photographers lined the aisles, their cameras already raised for the perfect shot. Vanessa's name was called. She appeared from the backstage corridor like she was walking onto a runway, back straight, chin lifted, every inch the star competitor. I'd seen this moment before in my first life. Her confidence, the rapt attention of the audience, the whisper of "she's going to win." But this time my lips curved for an entirely different reason. She handed her USB drive to the technician with steady hands. The big screen flickered as the file loaded. I folded my arms, my heart thudding with a calm, deliberate rhythm. Her voice rang out, warm and confident. "The theme of my final design is forbidden love, inspired by..." A collective gasp cut her off. The main screen lit up, not with the sleek CD renderings of her jewelry designs, but with a series of grainy, intimate photographs. Vanessa and Caleb. Her body tangled with his in ways no sister should be caught in. The air in the hall changed instantly. Shock rippled through the crowd like a stone breaking the surface of still water. "Oh my God," someone whispered loudly enough to carry. "That's her brother," a woman hissed. "No wonder she never brought him to events." I stood perfectly still, letting the murmurs swell and twist into something uglier. Vanessa's face went white. She spun to the technician, her voice sharp, desperate. "That's not my file. Stop it, stop the slideshow." But the images kept rolling, close-ups, different angles, proof staged well enough that it didn't matter whether it was real or not. To the audience it was damning. "Disgusting," a man near the back muttered. "I thought she was the sweet one," another scoffed. "Guess not." Vanessa's legs buckled. She dropped to her knees right there on stage. I moved then, weaving through the stunned murmurs to the foot of the steps. "Tessa," I called, using the nickname I'd given her in our first year. My tone was urgent, caring, exactly what people expected from a loyal friend. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, wet, and frantic. I took the steps 2 at a time and crouched beside her, shielding her from the cameras as best I could. "It's okay," I whispered, low enough that only she could hear. "Let's get you off stage." Her fingers clawed at my arm, holding on as though I were the only thing tethering her to the ground. We made it to the wings, where I steered her toward the backstage lounge and eased her into a chair. She was trembling, her breathing shallow and ragged. Her voice cracked. "Aurora, you're the only one who's ever seen my USB. Tell me you didn't. Tell me this isn't you." The intensity in her eyes was almost enough to make me laugh. Even in this moment her mind was already trying to assign blame. I kept my face calm, concerned. "Why would I? What would I gain from humiliating you? You think I care about this?" I gestured vaguely toward the stage. "No, Vanessa. Whoever did this knew exactly how to hurt you." Her breath hitched. "Then who?" I made a show of thinking, as though genuinely puzzled. "We should check if anyone unusual came backstage. Maybe someone from the audience got in. I'll ask the event staff to review the surveillance footage." That seemed to calm her at least a fraction. She nodded, wiping at her cheeks. Hey. Yes. Please. I left her there and walked out into the hallway, waving down one of the event coordinators. Can we review the cameras near the lounge? I asked. The man winced, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm sorry, ma'am. The hallway cameras malfunctioned this morning. We have no footage from that section. I tilted my head. None. None, he confirmed, looking nervous. From behind me, Vanessa's voice rose again, sharper now. What do you mean none? That's unacceptable. This is your negligence. You let someone waltz in here and destroy my reputation, and you don't even have cameras working. The coordinator stammered, apologizing profusely. I put a hand on Vanessa's shoulder. Hey, yelling won't fix it right now. Let's go home. We'll figure out our next step there. She looked at me like I was her last lifeline. You'll help me? Of course, I said, meeting her gaze with unwavering sincerity. We'll get to the bottom of it. Inside, my satisfaction was cold and deep. The morning after the competition was eerily quiet on campus. It wasn't that people didn't recognize me, they did, and they knew I was close to Vanessa. But they were careful, as if I were carrying something contagious. Gossip had its own scent, and it was all over the air. I was walking back toward the dorm when I heard the crackle of a cheap loudspeaker. Vanessa. Get down here. You think you can hide from your family? Get your ass out here right now. The voice was unmistakable, brash, abrasive, dripping with the entitlement of someone who had never worked for anything. Caleb Ward. Curiosity pulled me closer. He was standing right outside the dorm entrance, a dented loudspeaker in one hand, his posture aggressive. Students gathered at a safe distance, phones out, recording. Caleb's voice boomed again, his words sharp enough to slice through the crisp morning air. Our family took you in so you could be my child bride, Vanessa. You were supposed to marry me when you turned 18. You begged to go to college and I let you, but the deal was you'd give me a child first. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Caleb was just getting started. And what did you do? You seduced me, tricked me out of all our family's money, and then disappeared for 7 years. Well, guess what? I found you. And this time you're coming home, whether you like it or not. The crowd erupted in a mix of disgust and morbid fascination. I could practically feel the videos hitting social media already, captions writing themselves. The dorm doors flew open and Vanessa stormed out, her face pale but blazing with fury. What nonsense are you spouting? She hissed, trying to grab the loudspeaker. We're siblings. Caleb dodged easily, smirking. And whose fault is that? If you'd just listened and married Fat Hank like I told you, none of this would have happened. That name, Fat Hank, stirred memories from my last life. A local loan shark. Brutal, crude, and not above using people as currency. Caleb had owed him a fortune back then. Vanessa froze, her glare sharp enough to cut glass. You're insane. But her voice lacked the volume it had on stage yesterday. Caleb leaned in, lowering his voice just enough that I had to step closer to hear. 3 months. That's all Hank gave me to pay him back. Marry him and the debt's gone. Simple. My lips curved in a smile he didn't see. Vanessa, however, was visibly shaken. She shoved past him and fled back into the dorm. Caleb shouted after her, but she didn't turn around. That evening my phone buzzed. It was a text from Vanessa. Can we talk? Please. I let her wait 10 minutes before replying. Come to my place. She arrived looking smaller. Her usual confident posture had collapsed into something hunched, defensive. Her eyes were rimmed red, from crying or lack of sleep I couldn't tell. The moment she saw me, she broke. It was Caleb, she sobbed, collapsing onto my couch. He's the one who switched my USB at the competition. He wants to force me back home to marry some disgusting man to pay off his debts. I never thought he'd stoop this low. Her voice cracked again. Aurora, you're the only one I can trust. I kept my expression carefully neutral, nodding as though I were weighing her words. If that's true, then you need to disappear for a while. At least until Caleb finds another target. Her eyes went wide. Disappear? Where would I even go? I have a solution, I said calmly. The presidential suite at the Sterling Crown Hotel. Tight security. Private elevators. No one gets in without clearance. You can stay there while I look into Caleb. Relief flooded her face. You'd really do that for me? Of course, I said. Then I let my voice drop, my tone cool and deliberate. But Vanessa, you must never betray me. Not in any way. If you do, I won't forgive you. A shiver ran through her. She forced a laugh, the sound brittle. Of course. I'd never. Her eyes darted away. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her squirm, then smiled faintly. Good. I'll arrange everything. She exhaled in visible relief. Later that night, I sat in my study with the hotel's number pulled up on my phone. The Sterling Crown, discreet, luxurious, and exactly the kind of place where a guest could vanish in plain sight. I booked the presidential suite under my name, then sent Vanessa the check-in details. Once that was done, I opened another message thread. This one to Marcus. Dinner tomorrow night? At the Sterling Crown? He replied almost instantly. Of course. What's the occasion? You'll see, I typed, smiling to myself. By the time I set my phone down, the pieces were in motion. Vanessa thought I was her protector. Marcus thought he was meeting me for a romantic evening. But I knew the truth. Tomorrow I'd begin stitching them into the same web. The Sterling Crown's rooftop restaurant was the kind of place that made even seasoned executives sit a little straighter. Crystal stemware gleamed in the candlelight. The city's skyline spread out beyond the glass like an expensive painting. I'd chosen our table deliberately, tucked in the corner with a perfect view of both the entrance and the elevators. Marcus arrived on time as always. He'd dressed for the occasion. Crisp white shirt, navy jacket, the subtle cologne I used to love. When he saw me, his expression softened into something almost boyish. Aurora, he said warmly, pulling out my chair. This place is beautiful. What's the occasion? I smiled. Just wanted to spend an evening with you. We've both been busy. He reached for my hand across the table. I've missed this. For a few minutes we made small talk over appetizers. The weather, the new client he'd been courting, some minor gossip from the social circuit. But my mind was already moving to the next step. When the waiter refilled our glasses, I leaned back and asked casually, Marcus, if someone hurt our daughter, really hurt her, what would you do? His jaw tightened instantly. Why would you even? He stopped himself, shaking his head. If anyone dared to lay a hand on her, I'd tear them apart. Limb by limb. I let my gaze linger on him, weighing the sincerity in his voice. In my last life, those words had been just that, words. When it mattered, he'd stood still. But tonight, I wanted to hear him make the promise again. Good, I said softly. You said it yourself. He frowned slightly, but I raised my glass, cutting off whatever question was forming. To us, I said. We drank. And we kept drinking. I was careful, never letting my own intake reach the point of clouding my judgment. But I kept his glass full, topping it off each time it neared empty. The warm flush in his cheeks spread, his speech loosening, his posture relaxing into something unguarded. By the time dessert arrived, Marcus was leaning back in his chair, blinking slow and heavy. You always did know my limit, he murmured. The restaurant manager appeared at my elbow just then. Ms. Hayes, he said quietly, Ms. Ward is in her suite. She's asleep. I smiled. Perfect. Please have someone help my husband to her room. The manager's brows lifted, but he knew better than to question a paying guest who'd just booked the presidential suite for a month. Two of the hotel's staff appeared within moments, lifting Marcus carefully from his chair. He mumbled something incoherent as they half-walked, half-carried him toward the private elevator. I followed at a leisurely pace, heels clicking against the polished marble. The next morning, I was already in the corridor outside the suite when the door clicked open. Inside, Vanessa stirred. Her hair was a tangle around her face, her makeup smudged. She groaned softly, pressing a hand to her temple. Then her eyes snapped open and she froze. Marcus was lying beside her, his shirt undone, his breathing slow and even. Vanessa's gaze darted from him to herself. The bare expanse of her collarbone, the red marks scattered across her skin. She jerked the sheet up to cover herself, her mouth falling open in silent horror. When Marcus stirred and rolled toward her, the panic in her eyes turned to something sharper, calculation. Let's pretend this never happened, she blurted. If you tell anyone I'll... She cut herself off, realizing how weak the threat sounded. Marcus sat up too fast, wincing. His eyes went wide when he took in the scene. Vanessa, what? How? Before either of them could piece together a plausible explanation, I stepped inside. Good morning, I said brightly. Both of them froze. Aurora. Marcus started, his voice rough. I ignored him, walking straight to the bed. Vanessa clutched the sheet tighter, her face flushing. I brought you here out of kindness, I said, my voice trembling with just the right amount of righteous fury. To keep you safe. And you repay me by sleeping with my husband. Vanessa's eyes went wide. No. It's not. The slap rang out before she could finish. Her head snapped to the side, hair falling into her face. She stared at me, stunned. I didn't give her time to recover. The second slap was harder. You can't even hold on to the most basic shred of decency. No wonder. I cut myself off, letting the implication hang in the air. Marcus tried to get between us, but I stepped back, turning toward the door. That was the cue. The reporters poured in like a wave. Cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, voices overlapping in a chaos of questions. Ms. Hayes, is it true your best friend seduced your husband? Vanessa Ward, care to comment on these allegations? Vanessa shrank back, her sheet slipping dangerously low as she tried to shield her face. It was a perfect storm. By noon, the footage was everywhere. Vanessa Ward, caught in bed with her best friend's husband. The headlines were merciless. Campus belle turns homewrecker, Belmont darling in betrayal scandal, from prodigy to pariah. Her phone calls went unanswered. Her social media accounts were flooded with insults. By the end of the week, the university made an official statement. Due to conduct unbecoming of a student, Vanessa Ward was expelled. And I didn't have to lift a finger to make any of it happen. The days after Vanessa's expulsion were like watching a slow-motion collapse. She stopped showing her face anywhere public, and when she did have to cross campus, usually to collect the rest of her belongings, she wore oversized sunglasses and a scarf, as if fabric could hide the shame clinging to her. Online, the scandal had taken on a life of its own. New rumors sprouted daily, each one uglier than the last. Screenshots from the competition stage were paired with clips from the hotel room, the story morphing into a grotesque urban legend. I thought she might try to fight back, deny everything, throw the blame on Marcus or me. But she didn't. Maybe she knew it was useless. Then a week later I got the call. Ms. Hayes. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. A nurse. You're listed as the emergency contact for Ms. Vanessa Ward. She was admitted to City General this morning after an apparent suicide attempt. She's in stable condition now. Can you come? I didn't answer right away. The last time I'd rushed to Vanessa's side in my previous life had been after a car accident during her internship. She told me then, "You're the only one I can count on." Now the irony was sharp enough to taste. "I'll be there," I said finally, and hung up. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Vanessa lay propped up against the pillows, her skin pale, a faint bruise blooming near the crook of her arm where the 4-line was taped in place. Her eyes flicked toward me when I entered and instantly hardened. "What the hell are you doing here?" Her voice was hoarse, but the venom in it was intact. "Get out." I closed the door behind me, stepping closer until I stood at the foot of her bed. "What else would I be doing? I came to see your downfall." Her lips curled into something between a sneer and a snarl. "Don't get cocky, Aurora. If I could come back, so can Marcus. When he finds out what you did to me, he'll never forgive you." My pulse quickened, not with fear but with recognition. I could come back. He was reborn too. It explained the sharpness in her gaze now, the way she looked at me not just with hatred, but with the wariness of someone who already knew my capacity for damage. I let a slow smile spread across my face. "Don't count on Marcus coming to save you. I won't give you that chance." Her eyes narrowed, but I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and clapped my hands lightly toward the doorway. Caleb stepped in a moment later, all obsequious smiles and faux gratitude. "Miss Hayes. Thank you for taking care of my sister all these years." "We were friends once," I said smoothly. "No need to thank me." Then, letting my voice drop just enough for Vanessa to hear the edge, I added, "But she's been through a terrible blow this time. Once you get her home, you should help her find a good man to marry. Someone to give her stability." The light in Caleb's eyes flared at the suggestion, greed sparking behind his thin veneer of brotherly concern. "You're right. A husband and children will keep her busy. No more reckless thoughts." Vanessa's face drained of color. She sat up straighter, her hands gripping the blanket. "Aurora, Don't. But I was already smiling at Caleb. I knew you'd see reason. By the next day Vanessa and Caleb were on a private jet, mine, heading back to their hometown. It wasn't charity. It was convenience. I wanted her contained, away from the city, where the next phase could unfold without interruption. Caleb wasted no time cashing in on the opportunity. His deadline with Derek Fat Bear Henson was looming, and Vanessa was the perfect bargaining chip. I knew Derek's type. Loud in public, cruel in private. His name wasn't an exaggeration, he was built like a tank with the kind of gut that came from both indulgence and intimidation. In my last life I'd seen him once at a distance holding court at a backroom poker game. Now he was the man Caleb promised Vanessa to in exchange for wiping his debt clean. The night she arrived, Derek didn't even bother with pleasantries. He tried to force her to seal the deal immediately. I didn't witness it, but I didn't have to. Word traveled fast in small towns. The whispers reached me within days. How she'd fought back, how she'd bitten him so hard he'd needed stitches. If she thought that would scare him off, she was wrong. From then on, Derek's patience evaporated. The beatings started small. A slap here, a shove there, but quickly escalated. Every 3 days a small punishment. Every 5 something worse. By the end of the first month, Vanessa was rarely seen in public without sunglasses or long sleeves, even in the heat. Me. I didn't lift a finger to stop it. Because some lessons have to be learned the hard way, and Vanessa Ward was long overdue for hers. With Vanessa securely out of my way, my focus shifted to the other half of the equation. Marcus Reed. In my first life I'd given him every benefit of the doubt. I told myself that love was about compromise, about forgiving flaws. I'd believed that his hesitation, his unwillingness to act when Vanessa hurt our daughter, was a moment of weakness, not a permanent rot in his character. But this time there would be no hesitation on my part. I started small. Marcus had always relied on a handful of powerful contacts, a few senior executives at Belmont, a real estate developer he played golf with every other weekend, a pair of venture capitalists who saw him as a safe, steady investment partner. I knew every name, every phone number, every favored restaurant. I didn't have to threaten anyone. A quiet word here, a whispered, confidential warning there, and the effect was the same. Deals stalled. Invitations stopped coming. The calls he made to follow up went unanswered. Next, I went after his reputation in subtler ways, planting doubts about his reliability, his financial stability, his judgment under pressure. Nothing blatant enough to trace back to me, but enough to make his allies wonder if Marcus Reed was worth the risk. He noticed the shift within weeks. "Aurora," he said one evening, coming into my study, "something's going on. People I've worked with for years are suddenly distant. Deals are falling through for no reason. Do you know anything about this?" I looked up from my laptop, expression neutral. "Why would I?" He hesitated. "Because it feels like someone's targeting me. And I can't think of anyone else who'd have a reason." "You give yourself too much credit," I said lightly, turning back to my screen. But inside I could feel the first threads of his composure starting to fray. By the 3rd month he was no longer just unsettled, he was desperate. He cornered me in the kitchen one night, his eyes bloodshot, his voice raw. "Aurora, I need to know. Why are you doing this? What did I do to deserve it?" I set down my glass of water and met his gaze, letting the silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably. Then I smiled, cold, deliberate. "You want to know?" I asked softly. He nodded quickly, almost like a man agreeing to a ransom demand. "Go die," I said. "Then you'll understand." The words landed between us like a blow. His face went slack, the color draining from it. For a moment I thought he might lunge at me, but instead he stepped back, shaking his head. "You've lost your mind," he whispered. "No," I said, my voice calm. "I've found it." 2 weeks later I got the call. Marcus had been found in his office, barely breathing, an empty pill bottle on the desk beside him. His assistant had walked in early and called an ambulance before it was too late. When I arrived at the hospital, he was lying in a private room, a ventilator mask covering his mouth and nose. His skin had the pallor of someone halfway out the door. His eyes fluttered open when he sensed movement. For a moment, there was something in them I hadn't seen in years. Not love exactly, but the ghost of it. "Aurora." His voice was a whisper, raspy and weak. "I'm sorry." I stood at the foot of his bed looking down at him. The words might have meant something once, but now, they were just air leaving a dying man's lungs. Too late, I said quietly. His eyes closed again, whether from exhaustion or resignation I couldn't tell. I left the hospital without looking back. Outside, the sky was a pale, washed-out blue, the air cool against my face. I breathed it in slowly, letting the moment settle. Vanessa was trapped in a life she couldn't escape, the shine stripped from her name, her beauty bruised and fading. Marcus was clinging to the edge of his own ruin, every lifeline cut. Me. I was free. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I'd kept my promise, to myself, to my daughter, to the part of me that had died on that rooftop with Vanessa. I walked away from them both without a trace of regret. They were broken beyond repair. And I was finally whole. The end.